When I finally understood that God never starts with what I lost, but with what I still have, it changed everything for me. I used to pray from a place of frustration, asking why things were taken away, why opportunities slipped through my hands, why people walked out, and why I felt so empty. I thought I had to wait for restoration before I could be useful again. But I was wrong. God doesn't need everything I used to have. He needs what I still carry, even if it's just a little. The moment that clicked was when I thought about Moses, standing in front of a burning bush, completely unsure of his calling, unsure of his worth, and full of excuses. And what did God ask him? What's in your hand? Not, what did you lose in Egypt? Not, what did Pharaoh take from you? Just that one question, what's in your hand? A staff, a stick, something so basic, so ordinary. And yet God used that very thing to part seas and topple empires. That made me realize I've been underestimating what's already in my life. I kept looking at my wounds, my losses, the people who left, the doors that closed, and I let all that convince me I wasn't enough. But God's never been in the business of asking for perfection. He just asks for availability. And sometimes the little you have left is more powerful in His hands than everything you once had when you were at your strongest. The enemy loves to whisper about what's missing. He wants me focused on the lack, because when I do that, I forget to activate what's still present. And here's the truth. God can't bless what you refuse to use. If you bury your gift because it feels too small, you're saying no to the very thing God could multiply. That's why the enemy attacks your confidence. Because if he can stop you from starting, he doesn't need to worry about stopping you later. There were moments when I thought I needed to rebuild everything before I could step out. I thought I needed more money, more clarity, more support, more healing. But I've learned that God doesn't require full restoration to begin His work. He uses the remnant, the leftover, the little bit of oil in the jar, the 2 fish and 5 loaves, the torn heart that still dares to trust. It's humbling, really, to admit that what I have isn't flashy or impressive, to admit I feel small. But I've come to see that being small in my own eyes isn't a curse. It's a setup for God to show off. My limitations become His stage. My weakness becomes His spotlight. And when He moves through what I thought wasn't enough, there's no room for pride, just awe. Sometimes I think about the widow in 2 Kings 4. She was drowning in debt. Her sons were about to be taken. She cried out to the prophet, expecting maybe some money, a miracle, something grand. But Elisha simply asked, "What do you have in your house?" She replied nothing, except a small jar of oil. That except was everything. That little jar was enough for God to unleash abundance. She just had to pour. And as long as she kept pouring, the oil kept flowing. I wonder how many times I've blocked my own breakthrough by refusing to pour, holding on to what little I have out of fear it's not enough, afraid to fail, afraid to be embarrassed, afraid to look foolish. But God doesn't multiply what you hide. He multiplies what you're willing to pour out. And faith means trusting that if I start with what I've got, He'll meet me in the process. I'm learning now to stop mourning what's gone. The job I didn't get, the friends who didn't stay, the version of myself that didn't make it. I'm not going to build a life around what I've lost. I'm going to build forward from what remains. Because what remains is more than enough when it's in God's hands. And here's the beautiful thing. God sees more in what I have than I do. I see a stick. He sees a staff that will part waters. I see a few words. He sees a voice that will shake nations. I see scars. He sees stories that will heal others. I see pain. He sees purpose. And all He asks is that I trust Him enough to begin. The moment I started using what I had instead of complaining about what I didn't, things began to shift. Not always overnight, not always visibly. But spiritually, something changed. My prayers became bolder. My steps became more confident. My heart opened up to possibilities I hadn't considered. And the same God who asked Moses, "What's in your hand?" was asking me the same. I just had to be honest and obedient. You don't need to have it all together. You just need to start with what's in front of you, the gift that still burns inside, the dream that still keeps showing up, the story you've lived through, the one thing you're good at, the voice you've been hiding. God doesn't need more. He needs movement. He'll bring the increase, the connections, the favor after you start, but not before. So now, when I feel empty or discouraged, I ask myself, what do I still have? And no matter how small the answer seems, I give it to God, because I've learned this one truth the hard way. God never starts with what you lost. He starts with what you have. And that's always enough. I used to think greatness would show up loud, obvious, and undeniable. That if I was really called, really chosen, really full of potential, it would be impossible to miss. But that's not how it works. Not with God. What I've come to learn, slowly, painfully, and honestly through a lot of wrestling, is that hidden my potential is hidden in what looks insignificant. Whoosh. Not in the spotlight, not in the applause, but in the quiet, overlooked places most people never notice. I remember seasons in my life where everything I did felt small. I was showing up, putting in the effort, staying consistent, but it felt like no one saw me, like nothing I was doing mattered. The enemy whispered things like, "This is pointless. You're wasting your time. If it really mattered, people would notice. You'd be further along by now." And for a while, I believed it. I let comparison convince me that my little corner of obedience wasn't enough. But then I started paying attention to how God moves, and I realized He never begins big. He always starts small. Seeds, not trees, whispers, not thunder, a baby in a manger, not a warrior on a throne. And suddenly my whole perspective began to shift. Maybe I wasn't being overlooked. Maybe I was being planted. God hides greatness on purpose. He buries it in the dirt of the ordinary. He wraps it in weakness, so it's not tainted by pride. He conceals it in struggle, so it can be purified by pressure. That's why some of the most powerful people you'll ever meet have the most painful beginnings. The world looks at them and sees strength. But God saw that strength when it was still hiding in a broken place no one cared about. There's a story I can't stop thinking about. The 5 loaves and 2 fish. A crowd of thousands. Everyone hungry. And all they have is a kid's lunch. That's it. Insignificant, right? But that little meal, probably packed by a mother who never imagined it'd make history, was all Jesus needed. Not because the food was impressive, but because the boy was willing. And once it was in his hands, the small became more than enough. That's the pattern. That's the rhythm of heaven. God takes what looks foolish and uses it to shame the wise. He takes what seems weak and makes it strong. Not after it grows, but so it can grow. If I had waited until I felt impressive to start moving, I would have missed everything God was trying to build through my obedience. Sometimes the most significant moments of my life didn't feel significant at all when they were happening. Praying when I didn't feel like it, showing up when I was discouraged, speaking truth when my voice trembled, forgiving when I wanted revenge. Those were the decisions that shaped my character, not the ones that looked impressive on the outside. Because anyone can perform when the lights are on, but God is watching what I do when no one's clapping. It's in the unseen that the roots grow deep. It's in the invisible that potential gets protected. God will hide you to prepare you. He'll keep you low so that when He lifts you, you don't fall. And while the world might call it delay, He calls it development. He's not punishing you. He's preserving you. You have no idea what's inside of you. That's what scares the enemy. Not where you are now, but what you'll become if you stay faithful. That's why he attacks your confidence. Why he magnifies your insecurity, why he keeps telling you your voice doesn't matter, your dream is too late, your effort is worthless. Because if you ever realized how powerful your small really is, you'd break chains, shake atmospheres, and walk in purpose like nothing could stop you. And here's the truth. I'd rather start small with God than go big without Him, because what's built on hype will collapse under pressure. But what's built in secret will stand when storms hit. So I'm learning to stop despising the small things, the daily habits, the tiny steps, the unseen moments. That's where transformation lives. The truth is, your potential doesn't need an audience. It needs activation. God has already placed everything you need inside you. The gifts, the wisdom, the creativity, the strength. It's all there. But it doesn't grow by waiting. It grows by working, by trusting, by pouring out what you have. Even when it feels like barely enough, it might look insignificant now, but in the hands of God, it becomes unstoppable. He doesn't need you to be impressive. He needs you to be willing. He's not asking for perfection. He's asking for surrender. That's the difference between worldly ambition and kingdom calling. The world says, prove your worth. God says, I've already put it in you. Now walk it out. So now, when I feel small, I don't panic. I remember that David was a shepherd before he was a king, that Joseph was in prison before he was in the palace, that Ruth was gathering scraps before she was in the lineage of Jesus. They didn't look like much, but God saw what was hidden, and He is doing the same with me, with you. Your potential may be buried in obscurity right now, but it's not wasted. God doesn't miss a single act of faith. Keep sowing, keep trusting, keep walking, because when the time is right, He'll take what looked insignificant and use it to shift everything. And you'll look back and realize it was never small, it was just hidden. And now it's time to let it grow. There was a time when I kept telling myself, I'll start once I have more. More money, more clarity, more confidence. I thought I needed the full picture before I made a move. But the truth is, I wasn't waiting on God. I was waiting on comfort. And faith doesn't live in comfort. Faith lives in motion, in stepping forward with what little you've got, even when it doesn't feel like enough. I used to pray for signs. I begged God for certainty. I wanted confirmation after confirmation. But what I really wanted was a guarantee. I wanted to eliminate the risk before I obeyed. That's not faith. That's control. And God isn't interested in helping me stay in control. He's interested in helping me trust Him. I realized this one day reading the story of the 10 lepers. They cried out to Jesus for healing, and what did He say? Go, show yourselves to the priests. That's it. No instant miracle, no proof, just a command. And the Bible says they went. They were healed, not before, not while they stood still. The healing came in the motions. And it hit me. Faith happens when you move, not when you wait. That wrecked me in the best way. Because I had been paralyzed by the idea that I needed to be ready before I acted. But ready is a myth. You're never going to feel completely ready. You just have to go and trust that God meets you on the way. Faith means using the little you have. Even if it's just one talent, one voice, one idea. Remember the parable? The man who buried his talent was the one called wicked, not because he stole or lied or failed, but because he did nothing. He was too afraid to risk what little he had, so he hid it. And God doesn't bless hiding, He blesses movement. That hit me hard, because I've buried things before. Out of a fear, out of insecurity. I thought if I couldn't do it perfectly, maybe I shouldn't do it at all. But God doesn't need perfection. He needs obedience. He can multiply effort. He can breathe on your small yes and turn it into something bigger than you imagined. But He can't bless what you refuse to bring. Sometimes I think we underestimate how much heaven moves when we take even the tiniest step in faith. We think if we don't have the budget, the support, the title, the platform, then we shouldn't try. But faith says, go with what you've got. I'll handle the rest. That's what God keeps whispering to me. Go with what's in your hand. I didn't always feel equipped. In fact, most of the time I feel underqualified. But I've learned that God qualifies the willing, not the perfect. He's not looking for the most talented. He's looking for the most surrendered. And surrender doesn't sound glamorous. It sounds like yes, when I'd rather run. It sounds like showing up when I feel invisible. It sounds like pushing through fear with shaking hands and a steady heart. There was a moment where I had no money, no backup plan, no applause, but I had a word, a quiet, burning sense that I needed to move forward. even though nothing made sense. So I did, one step, then another, and slowly things started aligning, not everything, not perfectly, but enough to keep going, because God doesn't give you the full mat. He gives you enough light for the next step. And that's where faith lives, in the unknown, not in the plan, but in the provider, not in the resource, but in the source. I don't need to know everything if I trust the one who does. That's what keeps me moving now. Not certainty, but confidence. Confidence that if God called me, He'll carry me. I've come to believe that hesitation is the enemy of calling, that procrastination is just fear in disguise, and that the enemy doesn't need to destroy me, he just needs to delay me. If he can keep me stuck in analysis, in self-doubt, in perfectionism, then he's already won. But when I move, no matter how small that move is, he loses ground, because motion is momentum, and momentum is warfare. When I think about Peter stepping out of the boat, the storm didn't stop. The waves didn't calm down first. He walked the chaos, not around it, not after it passed. And as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he did the impossible. The moment he focused on the circumstances, he sank. And that's what happens to us. We start moving, then look around in panic. But if we keep our eyes up, we'll find ourselves walking in places we once thought were impossible. Faith isn't a feeling. It's not goosebumps or emotional highs. It's obedience in the face of uncertainty. It's saying yes when everything in you wants to wait. It's building when no one believes in you yet. It's trusting that the God who gave you the vision will also give you the provision, but not before you move. So now I move differently. I don't wait for perfection. I don't wait for applause. I don't even wait for full understanding. I just move. I use what I've got, my voice, my time, my gift, my story, and I trust that it's enough for today, that if I just bring my 5 loaves and 2 fish, He'll handle the miracle. Because faith doesn't wait for more. Faith moves with what's already in your hand. And once you take that step, once you dare to trust without a guarantee, you'll find God's been waiting on the other side of your obedience the whole time. I used to think miracles were reserved for the deeply spiritual, the ones with perfect prayers, the right connections, and all the resources lined up. I thought if I didn't have enough, I wasn't qualified for breakthrough. But I was wrong, completely wrong. I learned something that changed everything for me. The miracle is in your obedience, not in your resources. There was a season in my life where I kept telling God, I don't have enough. I looked at my bank account, my skill set, my support system, and it just didn't add up. I was convinced I had to wait until everything looked right before I could move forward. But God kept pressing something on my heart, not an answer, not a provision, a command, go. And that made no sense to me. Go with what? Go how? I had nothing, at least that's what I thought. But that's where obedience gets tested. Not when everything's available, but when everything seems absent. Because that's where faith becomes real. That's where God shows you who He really is. There's a story in the Bible that hit me deep. It's the story of the widow in 2 Kings 4. She's broke, her husband is gone, her sons are about to be taken by creditors, and she's desperate. Elisha asks her one simple question. What do you have in your house? And she replies, nothing, except a little oil. That right there, that word, except, that's the place where most of us get stuck. We disqualify what we have. We downplay it. We call it nothing. But God calls it enough. Elisha doesn't ask her for money, influence, or connections. He asks her for obedience. He tells her to go borrow jars from her neighbors, as many as she can, then shut the door behind her and start pouring the oil she already has. And here's the part that moves me every time. The oil didn't stop flowing until she ran out of jars. Not when she ran out of strength, not when she ran out of time, but when she ran out of space. That means the miracle didn't depend on how much oil she started with. It depended on how far she was willing to obey. God could have filled her pantry instantly. He could have multiplied the oil in front of Elisha and made it flashy, but he didn't. He wanted her to actually participate in the miracle. And that's exactly what obedience is. It's participation in the impossible. God doesn't need your resources. He needs your willingness to move without them. That hit me like a brick, because for so long I'd been praying for blessings I wasn't prepared to obey into. I kept saying, God bless me financially, but I wasn't willing to budget or sow. I said, use me in ministry, but I wouldn't speak up when I had the chance. I asked for doors to open, but refused to knock. Obedience isn't glamorous. It's not always loud or public. Sometimes it looks like saying no when you want to say yes. Sometimes it's forgiving someone who doesn't deserve it. Sometimes it's waking up early to pray when you'd rather sleep. It's often inconvenient, uncomfortable, and unseen. But it's the key to everything you've been praying for. There was a moment I'll never forget. I felt God calling me to take a leap, something that terrified me. I didn't have the finances, the approval, or even the full plan. But I had that quiet nudge, that inner voice saying, trust me. Go. And I wrestled hard. Every excuse rose up. But finally, I obeyed. Just one small act of yes. And looking back now, that moment became the very thing that unlocked a flood of blessings I never saw coming. Not because I had the resources. I didn't. But because I trusted the source. God will often test your heart with small instructions before he trusts your hands with big outcomes. We want the Red Sea to part, but Moses still had to lift the staff. We want fire from heaven, but Elijah still had to build the altar. We want water from the rock, but Moses still had to strike it. Obedience always precedes the miracle. Sometimes we're waiting for the miracle to motivate our obedience, but God's waiting for our obedience to unlock the miracle. I'm learning not to ask, do I have enough? But instead, am I willing to obey with what I have? Because in God's hands, little becomes limitless. And he doesn't bless fear disguised as caution. He blesses faith disguised as obedience. Even now, I feel it. God isn't asking you to come up with the solution. He's asking you to trust him enough to take the next step. Just the next step, not the whole staircase. Just today's act of obedience. And maybe you've been praying, waiting, hoping, but the shift won't come until you move. Don't wait for perfect timing. Don't wait for approval. Don't wait until the fear goes away. Obey scared if you have to. Obey small if you have to. Just move. Because on the other side of obedience is provision, peace, power, and miracles. The oil will flow, the way will open, the doors will shift. But only if you do the one thing God's been whispering all along. Obey. The miracle isn't in the money. It's not in the status, the spotlight, or the skill. The miracle is in the moment you say yes. Yes when it's hard. Yes when it's quiet. Yes when you're unsure. Because that's the place where heaven shows up. And when you look back, you'll realize it was never about what you had. It was always about what he could do through a surrendered heart.